Hey, friends and listeners of the Switch for Good podcast. Yep, that's you. I have some really exciting news. Dotsie and I have started a Switch for Good podcast Facebook group. We created it so we can build a community of fans that will help us improve the show and deliver on the topics that you want to learn more about. So we want to hear what your favorite content is, what you want more of, and what you want less of. And if you like the length of the show, Dotsie and I are always talking about the length of the show, right, Dotsie?
Yes.
We want to tailor our show around the needs and desires of our incredible listeners, almost 500,000 of you. And it's really simple to join. Just go to our Switch for Good Facebook page. That's Switch, the number 4, and then Good. And then click on groups. And there we are, the Switch for Good podcast chat. You can post directly in the group, share ideas, talk to other listeners, and connect with like-minded folks. So go, run, join our Facebook group and tell us what you want.
Welcome, everybody. We're so happy to be back with you. It's Dotsie and Alexandra, and it's the Switch for Good podcast where you've landed. Oh, Alexandra, I have been struggling in a few different areas with activism. And so, you know, sometimes when that happens, when I'm struggling with something, I bring it to our audience. I bring it to you. I bring it to our podcast audience that always seems to provide support, solace, but real good thoughts. Many people write to us at podcast@switchforgood.org. And so I have some thoughts on activism, and one specific area that I've been struggling with that I would absolutely adore our audience's feedback and opinions on, whether positive or negative or whichever way you want to go with it. So let me just set this up. Some of you know who have been listening for a long time, but in June of 2019, I went to speak to the U.S. Dietary Guidelines Committee in Washington, D.C. The U.S. Dietary Guidelines reworks our food pyramid every 5 years, and this was the period of time they were listening to public comments about the new dietary guidelines that were going to come out in 2020. And so I went there to state my case on why dairy should be removed from the new guidelines. And my good friend, and our very first podcast guest, Dr. Milton Mills, was there as a speaker as well. Turns out our speeches to the guidelines committee were very, very similar. We were actually the only two that focused our entire 3 minutes, you have 3 minutes to speak, on the dietary racism inherent in peddling dairy to communities of color, given that upwards of 75 to 80% of them, all the way to 98, 99% cannot digest dairy, right? And it gives them painful stomach cramps, indigestion, bloating, diarrhea, itchy skin, exacerbates asthma. We talk about these side effects of lactose intolerance a lot on this podcast. So post Washington, D.C., post speaking to the dietary guidelines, I really kind of wanted to take on this fight, as Alexandra knows. And so Switch for Good launched pretty much an all-out battle and a massive campaign urging the dietary guidelines to remove dairy and that's our first ask most definitely. But if indeed that wasn't possible, that it was very important to deem soy milk nutritionally equivalent, especially for school children, right? We know over 40 million children that attend public schools in the United States don't have access to food, much less healthy food at home. So they're getting their only couple meals a day at school, and many of them are from BIPOC communities, and so dairy milk makes them sick. So we did end up winning, number B of that. They did not remove dairy. We've still got a lot of work to do, but soy milk was deemed nutritionally equivalent to cow's milk. So we are in a process now of working to change the law in Congress as it relates to what they call the milk note in schools. And the milk note is that that every child has to have a doctor's note if they don't want to take a cow's milk. So this needs to be changed to, if they don't take a cow's milk or a soy milk, eventually we want to completely get rid of the milk note. And then the other part that we're working on is for Congress to pass a law that soy milk is available in schools, right? Because there's plenty of cow's milk available, but right now you have to kind of bring your own soy milk. And I recognize, let me just say this, because we get a lot of emails on this. I recognize that some people have issues with soy. Some people are allergic to soy. If it's not organic soy, you might be going down a slippery slope. The reason that soy milk was chosen is for those very 40 million children who need a good profile of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, right? So they deemed soy milk as nutritionally equivalent in the macronutrient category to dairy milk. So let me just say that, because children who don't get a good nutrition profile, if you were to say, okay, rice milk is fine, they're going to be malnourished because there's not enough protein, let's say in rice milk, because they're not getting any other real food during the day. So maybe they're having a piece of chocolate cake at school and some French fries, and that's why soy milk was deemed, and not other plant milk. So let me just say that.
Nancy, I have a question.
Yeah.
Just you said something about you have to bring your own soy milk, or is soy milk being offered?
It is not being offered in public schools, right? No. So
how do they get it? How do the kids get it?
Well, they'd have to bring it. That's what the
kids are the ones who are poor and.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we're working to change in Congress. Absolutely. And we're really just asking them to go along with what their own dietary guidelines has just recommended, right? So we got that change, but it's like, now we have to actually change the practice, right, of it in the school. So they don't have to have a milk note if they want soy milk, and soy milk is also offered. So we still have plenty of work to do, and that's what we're working on. But back to activism, as this fight, this battle, this activism has unfolded over the past year and a half. Many have brought up to me and to us at Switch for Good that because I'm white and most of our full-time staff at Switch for Good is white, not all, but most, we really have no business fighting this fight, that we shouldn't be speaking for BIPOC communities. We should be speaking about this form of dietary racism. We should be standing up for this cause. And Alexandra, as you know, I brought this very concern, this very issue up on a podcast that we did with John Lewis, Badass Vegan, probably around episode 40 or 50 or something like that of our podcast, because I was starting to feel really down that people were saying, you shouldn't, or you couldn't you can't be doing this work. And he felt very opposite to that. And I think you probably remember when he said, Dotsie, you have to stand up for this. Don't you dare not. The oppressor always has to stand up for the oppressed. If we want to see change, it's going to take him, me, he said, me, you guys, all of us to make this issue even bring it into the public consciousness and the awareness of it, and then to actually fight it and end it. Under no circumstances would we run any kind of, campaign or speak up about an issue that mostly affects people of color. It does affect some white people, about 15%, but much lower rates than color. If we weren't having people of color representing their own voice, right? So the videos that we do and the conversations we have around this, if we run a campaign, which we will be doing as we're working to change this law in Congress, we certainly will be featuring BIPOC stories from those communities and put forth their voices. Absolutely. It's not just, we're not gonna have a bunch of white people talking on it, but the organization behind this is our staff is mostly white. So I'm curious as to your thoughts, listeners. Do you feel that there can be a space where someone of a different race stands up for another race and speaks up against the oppression? Is that okay? How does that make you feel? What are some situations that would maybe make you feel uncomfortable about this, if any? Also, what are some pitfalls you think white people fall into when wanting to stand up for people of color on issues that they feel are important, that they care about? This is an issue that I just deeply care about. I once I went down this dairy road, just starting from simply being sick of the U.S. Olympic Committee telling me I had to have dairy to recover as an athlete. It was that simple that got me angry. And then I went down this rabbit hole to really understand the real dangerous, deleterious effects of cow's milk on the human body, and then how racially biased it is to be pushing this food group on people of color. So I've grown to care very deeply about it. And I'm just interested. I'm interested in your thoughts and what you think about me speaking up about it and our organization.
And especially we want to hear from people of color, their point of view, and everybody out there, but especially people of color, right, Dotsie? Because that's the criticism that you've gotten, is that you might be representing people of color and you shouldn't be.
Right. Yeah. But I'd love every color to weigh in, because I'm just interested in the topic as a whole, like how people feel about it. We learned so much in our book club that we did, right, on me and white supremacy, and that I'm curious as to kind of the feelings that all colors have about this issue, because I'm positive there's also, some white people out there that are working on another issue that maybe is, something like what we're working on that affects mostly people of color. Do they feel like they shouldn't be doing that work? What have they been told? Yeah. So everyone.
Great. Thank you, Dotsie, for your work. I think what you're doing is terrific and support you. And I actually agree with John Lewis that the oppressor group, people from that group, need to speak up for the oppressed, just like we're speaking up for animals, because they can't. And those of us in power who have a power dynamic need to take the side of people who have less power, without drowning out their voice and taking into account that what they want too. So being an ally basically is what you're doing. You're being an incredible ally.
I hope so. That's the goal. Yeah. It's not to steal any voices and make it our own. It's allyship. So thanks for listening, everyone, and share your thoughts either at podcast@switchforgood.org or just email me, dotsie@switchforgood.org. All right, on to the guests. We have a powerhouse today. Here we go.
Joan Ifland, PhD, is the leading expert in processed food addiction. In fact, she wrote the book on the issue, and it's called Processed Food Addiction. With over 20 years of experience in the field, she now helps practitioners manage and assist their clients with this kind of addiction recovery. After recovering from her own struggles, Joan committed to help individuals obtain a higher quality of life and avoid the preventable diseases so common in today's environment of these highly addictive processed foods. We're so eager to learn more from you. Welcome, Joan Ifland.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's wonderful that you're here. I wanted to start off sort of in the macro first, and then we'll go down to the personal. Because one of the things that you've taught me, certainly, is that this processed food addiction is something that started around in the 1980s. There was a shift in the way that we ate in the United States. So talk a little bit, please, to us about how this change happened in the food industry and how it's affected us, especially here in the United States.
Okay, this is a great place to start. I like starting with business practices. So I had this weird background, right? My undergraduate degree is in political science and economics, and I worked in a state legislature as a fiscal analyst, and then I went to business school at Stanford, and then I worked in a corporation for 5 years, and then I was so sick that I couldn't go back to work after having my 2 babies. So what happened? I'm very interested in business models, and what we see is that in 1985 through 87, the tobacco industry bought Kraft, Nabisco, and General Foods. And they immediately started applying the addiction business model. There's a business model for alcohol and vaping and tobacco and cannabis. And the pharmaceutical industry used it to sell opiates to doctors. It's a business model. It's the 5 A's of the addiction business model. You ramp up the addictive properties in the product, but you hide it. You layer on a lot of advertising. You make it available everywhere so people can use it often enough to create the addiction. You make it very affordable. It has to be cheap enough to be used often enough. And then you aim at the youngest age. So in the case of processed foods, those are, you know, at the moment of conception, if the parents are eating processed foods, the genes are already replicating in an addictive way. And you never let up. Like the first thing that you see those tobacco companies doing is ramping up the Saturday morning cartoon commercials from about already 160 per Saturday morning to like 560 in the space of 7 years. And this is how you addict a brain cell. First, you expose the brain to the addictive substances, sugar, fat, salt, dairy, etc. And then you constantly provoke it. You constantly remind, you associate. By association, you are literally, through Pavlovian conditioning, teaching those little tiny young brain cells to crave, to release a lot of dopamine, serotonin, cannabinoids, and opiates. That's an addiction.
I'm just curious, the tobacco industry who bought these food companies, do you think that they realized that these foods were unhealthy? Like, obviously they created this addictive model so that they would buy a lot of them, but they have families themselves at home that they are making sick. So at the beginning, there wasn't a realization that this food could make people sick or would make people sick.
Oh, of course there was.
Okay.
But here's how I answer that question. So I've read a lot about the tobacco experience. I believe this quote comes from a book called Cigarette Papers. You know that as part of the tobacco settlement, they were required to deposit thousands of documents. They deposited a lot at the University of California, San Francisco. So this book, Cigarette Papers, quotes one of the tobacco executives saying, "I would rather have a shorter life with cigarettes than a longer life without." Well, that's addictive thinking. You know, you see the dominance of the addicted brain cells in that line of reasoning. That's not frontal lobe dominance. That's the addicted brain cells. I'd rather be sick. I'd rather be dying and still using. And that's why addictions are lethal.
I think I heard you also say that the head of some junk food company doesn't feed his own kids the food that his company, what was that?
Yeah, so that, we have a new book, Hooked by Michael Moss, has just come out. And I don't know how he did, but that's his second book. Sugar, Fat, Salt was the first one. He got these executives to talk to him. He got the consultants who went in and ramped up the sugar, fat, salt content of processed foods. Howie Moskowitz, he got Howie Moskowitz to talk to him. Howie Moskowitz, so finally, towards the end of Sugar, Fat, Salt, Michael Moss is asking him.
And who is he? I don't know.
So he's a Harvard PhD in experimental psychology and marketing. These schools actually turn out these monstrous people. And what he did was he developed a very data-intense method for figuring out what is the maximum amount of sugar, fat, salt we can put in a product before the consumer rejects it. Well, sugar, fat, salt are highly addictive. When you touch a taste bud or the roof of your mouth with sugar, fat, salt, the brain recognizes it within half a second. So this is opposed to 10 seconds for cigarette smoke or 10 minutes for cocaine. Highly addictive. And they just ramped up. Like before Howie Moskowitz, tomato sauce did not have sugar in it. After Howie Moskowitz, tomato sauce, a half cup serving, nobody eats just half a cup. It had the equivalent of the sugar content of 2 Oreos. So maybe in 1970, you could eat 1 slice of bread. But by 1999, you would eat 1 slice of bread. The addiction would be triggered by the large quantity of sugar, fat, salt in that slice of bread, and you would end up eating the loaf. This is how America and the world, because the tobacco industry already had relationships around the world for the corner stores where they were selling cigarettes, and for the advertising. Remember, the availability and affordability, availability and advertising are 2 of the 5 A's. And tobacco was able to just push these processed foods right through those channels. And that's why obesity spread around the world so fast. 20 years is nothing.
It's the bliss point. Is that what they're trying to get?
Yes, and now Michael Moss has redeemed himself, in my eyes, because the second book, he confesses. I wasn't sure about the addiction in the first book, but now I am. And the second book repeatedly and explicitly references processed food addiction. So he has redeemed himself. The whole Sugar, Fat, Salt book is about food addiction, but he skirted it. And now he's facing it head on.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you and took you off track. There was an executive who said that he wouldn't feed his kids the product. And was that the Lunchables guy, or who was
I
it?
think it was, because the salt content in Lunchables is astronomical. So you can teach a child salt addiction by this repeat exposure, by applying the addiction business model. Children are born with a preference for sugar. You don't have to teach them sugar addiction. You just reinforce it by giving them a lot of it. Yeah.
Right, because there's lactose in their own mother's breast milk, probably to get them to eat and bond. It's across history of all mammals, right? You have a baby that's struggling to bond and eat, then they want to come back for that sweet.
Yeah.
Did you yourself struggle with food addiction?
Oh gosh, I did.
Okay.
So I grew up thin, and I was born in 1951. Very few people were overweight in that era. We were all super thin, but we were violent. I mean, my household was always fighting. So there was my mother with caffeine and sugar in her hand most of the time. My father, my mother did not know how to cook. So she used a lot of convenience foods. And our particular reaction is we're very sensitive to the elevated adrenaline that comes with using processed foods, like all drugs. And we fought all the time. It was it was a traumatic upbringing. And then when I had my own kids in 83 and 84, I was desperate not to be that person that was constantly blowing up, raging, unpleasant, critical, anxious. And I started therapy. I did 10 years of therapy. Then I started joined a women's organization, a healing organization. And finally a 12-step group for codependency, and none of it helped. And then I started yo-yo dieting when I had my 2 kids because I quit smoking. I thought, this is interesting. There was plenty of evidence that when you quit smoking, you start eating. And I used to think, the tobacco company just saw that coming. It just friggin' moved right over. But it was more than that. It was the invention of high fructose corn syrup, which is cheap. Remember, it has to be affordable. And then the corrupt US government in the food pyramid was advocating. I mean, I'm sure the tobacco executives couldn't believe their ears. Not only are their advertising being suppressed, the US government is helping them, because the whole bottom row of the first food pyramid, the effort for that was led by a Harvard researcher who had been in the pocket of the sugar industry. So refined carbohydrates were that whole bottom row.
You're through your stress and your strife and your process. You started leaning into, what did you start buying that you got addicted to?
I got in the codependency group, somebody heard the sugar driving my behavior. So they suggested a different 12-step group, food addicts in recovery. And I'm like, why? Because I was in a thin phase. But at the end of the year, I'd regained the weight. I said, well, okay, I'll try that. And, immediately very weird things started happening. Like I lost the cravings and I lost the brain fog and I lost the fatigue. And like, what is going on? I was eating way too much food, but by the end of the week, I'd lost 2 pounds.
When you shifted from what to what? I would love to be specific.
Sorry,
donuts to potatoes, or like
no,
what?
When I took out the sugars and flours.
Okay, so
sugars and flours,
baked goods and
yeah,
like that?
Anything that had a sweetener in it. Although we were allowed to use artificial sweeteners, and I didn't take out the gluten and I didn't take out the dairy. So specifically the sugars and flours.
Okay.
And, but it was in week 3, the allergies immediately started letting up and the bloating, a lifelong sinus infection cleared up. But it was in the 3rd week that I adopted this as a career. And that's when I realized I hadn't yelled at anybody in 3 weeks. And I can tell you exactly where I was standing in my kitchen, and like a ton of bricks, it hit me. Oh gosh, this has got something to do with the food. I had joined that support group, so I went there that weekend. No internet. I mean, this is 1996. And finally, I was able to ask my question: does this make people less irritable? Like 20 heads.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you went cold tofurkey because you just completely took it out, and so 3 weeks later.
I didn't quite believe it. So I was still drinking wine on the weekends, and then I had kind of just a really, really horrifying experience. And that's when I cut out the wine. So yeah, I mean, I was a cook. I knew how to cook. So I just started making the clean meals. But then February 19th, 1996, when I let go of the alcohol, then I started picking up and how in 12-step groups you pick up a chip. So yeah.
Is food addiction something are we all susceptible to this sugar and flour? We just don't know it.
Yeah.
Or are some people more susceptible than others?
And more sensitive even?
Yes. I mean, there is a genetic, it's called a genetic anomaly. So there's a genetic component to it. However, when you see something like, so before tobacco comes into processed foods, already the obesity overweight rate in the United States is about 45%. In 1963, 20 years earlier, a tobacco company bought Hawaiian Punch. And they applied the tobacco addiction model to Hawaiian Punch. And this is a chilling document. It's an internal tobacco document. It's on file at the University of California, San Francisco. They have published on it. There's an explicit description of how they're going to transfer tobacco marketing to sugar for children. It's horrifying. But this is why, for example, juice boxes, which are sugar water, are the same shape and colors as packets of cigarettes.
Did they feel like that kids would feel more comfortable with cigarette packs when they got into their teens because of juice boxes and their enjoyment of them?
I think they just saw a market opportunity. Everybody knows that sugar is addictive. We already had the research on that in 1963. And so I think they were just developing a new market. Mm-hmm. And they really like that market because the younger you can addict an animal, any animal, including children, the harder it is to resolve, to put the addiction into remission. So here, they could ramp up the sugar content in baby formula 52%. And nobody was stopping them. It wasn't like the tobacco experience where they got, they got curtailed in advertising and everything else. Absolutely no restraint. So you see right after that, you see Kool-Aid being picked up by the tobacco companies, and then Capri Sun. And if it's a liquid, it gets into the system more quickly. It's just diabolical.
Mm-hmm.
They also started advertising like toys with cereals.
Yes.
Tell us about the actual types of advertising they used to lure us all to think that these foods were, well, they hit our bliss point, but they were fun, and what attracted made us want them even more.
Yeah. So when you addict children, and then what you do is you train them to nag their parents. I don't know if you've ever seen the Captain Crunch commercial where the babysitter has come and the children in the commercial, she's denying them Captain Crunch, and I don't remember exactly what they do to her, but she's the bad guy. She's made into the bad guy. So children, it's very hard to talk about. It's so awful. So use of idols. Spider-Man and McDonald's, there's a very diabolical thing going on now with Travis Scott. You want to eat like Travis Scott. Travis Scott is the right demographic. He's the right age, he's a rapper. And so they're using Travis Scott, and they have the Travis Scott meal. And you can go to McDonald's and you could order the Travis Scott meal. So in the commercial, Travis Scott is like, oh, you're like me, you're eating like me. We're eating together because we're friends. It's preying on lonely children. Because once you really get this addiction, you are lonely because you only have the addiction in your head. It's very hard to connect with other people. Plus your body shape might be something that people are free to traumatize, stigmatize people about. It's a very, very, very sad life to be an addicted child. And anyway.
What is the definition of food addiction?
The American Psychiatric Association, over 50 years of research and discussion, have developed 11 criteria by which you can diagnose alcoholism. So for my doctoral dissertation, I validated those criteria for overeating. So the same behaviors manifest in overeating as in alcoholism, same behaviors. And then there's one chapter in the textbook on each of those behaviors because it answers the question, does this behavior also exist in overeating? Mm-hmm. So I went through the research and I said, yeah, look, here are 25 studies showing that this behavior exists in overeating. Here's 125 studies showing that that behavior exists in overeating. So I can go through the 11 behaviors if you would like.
I would love that.
Yeah.
Okay. So unintended use. Like you wake, I'm going to eat clean, and by 10 o'clock you're at the vending machine.
Let me ask a question before you start. As people are listening to this list, is there if you have 6 of these things, you may want to think about having a food addiction, or do you need all 11, or what would you suggest people to listen out
Good
for
question.
as they're hearing this
So
list?
there are thresholds.
Okay.
2 or more is a mild addiction, 4 or 5 is a moderate addiction, and 6 and over is a severe addiction.
Okay, thank you.
So this was the big discovery out of the textbook. There were 2. 1, it's severe addiction, and 2, people are deeply traumatized. So unintended use.
Okay.
You're going to eat 1 out of the package, and somehow the package is eaten. You're going to drive straight home, and your car turns itself into the fast food place. Unintended use. Okay. Number 2 is failure to cut back. And we see that over 70% of Americans are now overweight or obese. They don't want to be that way. They have tried. Michael Moss has got a statistic, 87% of Americans eat reduced calorie processed foods. So there are 87% of Americans want to cut back, and it's not working. We see research that 100% of weight loss, 99.9% of weight loss is followed by weight regain. Mm-hmm. So most Americans are experiencing unintended use and failure to cut back. Number 3 is time spent. So gradually you're spending more time thinking about food, you're spending more time stopping, you are spending time planning to get it, and then recovering. So people literally, they will pass out. These are drugs. The brain is quite altered in the same way that addicted people are, brains are altered. Number 4 is cravings. Cravings are so prevalent that the food manufacturers use them. I saw a package in the store the other day that on the back of it said, highly addictive. Are you kidding? So you see these manufacturers trying to normalize addiction. So that you get addiction, you're diagnosed with an addiction, but you think, oh, I don't have to do anything about it, it's normal.
Mm.
Yeah, so this is diabolical. And then number 4 is failure to fulfill roles. You can't get down on the floor with your kids, but you're still eating. You're too shamed to apply for that promotion, but you're still eating. Your joints are so destroyed that you can't work anymore, or you're so depressed that you can't work anymore. You're so obese that you can't work anymore and you're still eating. No, the next one is relationship problems. And if you are craving intensely and you're just like, you have a relationship, somebody you love in your household, you spend the whole evening waiting for them to go to bed so that you can go to the laundry room and get the whatever you hid there. It's very hard when you're craving to have a relationship with somebody, or somebody's complaining about the way you're eating and they're desperate for you to stop and you can't stop. Relationship problems. The next one is cutting back on activities. So you used to belong to the book club, but you don't go anymore because your body shape is not okay, or because you'd rather go home and eat, or because you're so depressed, you're assuming that nobody wants to see you there. And then you get into hazardous use. I mean, this, you can see this is alcoholism, but it's people think of drinking and driving, hazardous use, or operating machinery. But if you watch people coming out of a fast food place, you know, they're driving with their elbow because they're trying to get the French fries in fast enough. Mm-hmm. There is such a thing as blackout eating. It's not in the research, but it's in the 12-step manuals for food addiction. People get groggy, brain fog. It's dangerous. Then there's use in spite of knowledge of consequences. Everybody has that. Everybody's like, I shouldn't eat this, but I'm going to. My doctor said not to, but who cares? It's my birthday, you know. And then there's eating for, the next one is tolerance. You're eating more than you used to. You used to stop for fast food once a week. Now you're stopping once a day. You used to only have that at night, and now you're having it at lunch. You used to just have that in the kitchen, but now it's also in the bedroom, in the den, in the laundry room. You used to buy this size container, and now you're buying 3 that size container, so that you can track tolerance. It's increased use. The addiction, it's the same for all addictions. And then the last one is using processed foods when you're not hungry. And what that is withdrawal avoidance. So when withdrawal starts, and we do have a proper withdrawal syndrome, and this is a hallmark of addictions, when it starts with a headache, or it starts with irritability, or it starts with depression, or it starts with stomach upset. It starts with fatigue. It's a very distinct syndrome. Mm-hmm. And people will use, you know, they'll go get some caffeine, or they'll get something to eat to make themselves feel better. That's withdrawal avoidance. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the most common ones, like I put out this quiz all the time. We have a big Facebook group, and what everybody seems to have: unintended use, failure to cut back, cravings, surprisingly time spent. People are just frustrated because it's in their head all the time. And then withdrawal avoidance, eating for reasons other than hunger, mm-hmm. and the use in spite of knowledge of consequences. That, I mean, it was an epiphany, because I'm writing away on these chapters. Chapter 1, yeah, everybody's got that. Chapter 2, well, everybody's got that. Chapter 3, everybody's got that. Chapter 4, everybody's got that. Chapter 5, most people have that. Chapter 6, most people have that one. Wow. Okay, this is a severe addiction. And suddenly, it was just like a blinding light. You understand why nothing else is working. Because there are very specific things that you do for a severe addiction. And it's not weight loss.
Talk to us about those then, because it sounds like you now work with people to help them get off their processed food addiction.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about some of the things that are important to recognize, and how your methods, how you've adapted the drug and alcohol recovery methods to help those with food addiction. What are some of the things that, if our audience can relate to maybe just of
Thank
those,
you.
but they still want to get better?
This is very interesting, because this is so much more severe than any drug or alcohol addiction ever on the planet. Because when you addict a newborn, every cell that is formed in that baby's, really when you addict at conception, every brain cell that's formed is either addicted or adapting to an addicted brain. And so you need a depth of recovery that we've never needed before. And what we did was we developed I'm going to start crying, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Because we found a pathway out. And this is HELL on earth.
Yeah.
And we found a way out. We found a way to go and get those people. So what it is, it's immersion recovery, immersion. And so, you know, another big flash came in December. I turned in the manuscript in like May of 2017. Immediately got to work building a training platform. I had already been building a website of handouts. And I had a daily phone call, because I thought, oh, Alcoholics Anonymous, 90 meetings in 90 days. Okay, well, we'll have a daily meeting. That was not nearly enough. It was a daily conference call. But in December, I met Zoom. Zoom. So in the first week of January 2018, we had a whole week, morning to night. I said, I'm going to do residential recovery, but people get to stay home. I was shocked. I had been at that point 22 years looking for answers. And we started the day. I just took volunteers from the conference call population. And at the beginning of the day, some people said, I can't do this. It's going to freak me out. I'm going to start dieting. I can't weigh and measure. I'm not ready for today. I just can't eliminate those foods. I'll start binging. I said, well, no, then don't do it. Just listen. And we did fun things through the day. At the end of the day, I checked in with them. How'd everybody do? Well, I ate clean. I ate clean. I've been trying for 20 years to eat clean. Today I did it. Eating without those processed foods, the sugars, the flours, the excessive salt, the dairy, the processed fats, and caffeine. I didn't ask for caffeine in that work. Caffeine's a different and very, very tough withdrawal. So yeah, we just got the processed foods out, and they all got through withdrawal that week. Withdrawal can be pretty tough. They all got through withdrawal. We did it again the next week with a paying population, same thing. So this was shocking. I counted up once. I had tried 14 different things between 1996, when I got off of sugars and flours. I started to try to tell everybody about it, and nobody could do it until that first week of 2018. 22 years, I tried 14 different approaches, including having my own prepared meal company. And none of it worked. None of it worked. So, yeah.
Talk to us about flour, because we know, and it's resonating with us, and I'm sure our audience. Sugar, fat, salt. Sugar, fat, salt. Yes, I can, even if you don't have a food addiction, you can say, oh, yep, that, my whole mouth kind of lights up when I get one of those three. But flour, that doesn't seem to have a taste of any of those three to me. What's going on with the really addictive nature of flour?
So it's a powder, which means it does not go through a breaking down system process. It gets into the bloodstream all at once. You get this blood glucose high, and there's a corresponding high in serotonin.
Okay.
It's another reason why this addiction is so hard to beat. There are so many different substances. If you just have alcoholism, then your dopamine reward system is not working. But this one, these combinations activate dopamine and serotonin and cannabinoid and opiate. You've got everything. I mean, it's massive. It's why the community, coming into community, is so important, because community will release oxytocin.
Yeah.
And you can make yourself feel better while these reward centers are repairing. And they do repair. They do come back. So it's just really, really hard. Flour also typically contains gluten. And gluten has a natural gluteomorphine in it. Dairy has 4 different kinds of casomorphines in it. And dairy is designed to put a baby cow to sleep. It's a narcotic because you want that cow to sleep while it absorbs the nutrients from the milk. It's a devastating product for humans. So yeah, that's the story on flour.
As far as thank you for that. The dairy, people, you find it in what seems like the strangest places, but now that we've learned more about the food industry and where they learn their tricks from, the tobacco industry, you realize it's obviously all completely on purpose. And it's in, one of the most surprising to me when I first started, really reading labels on everything is crackers. Like, there's milk in almost every cracker. And I'll have friends that say, why are you looking at the cracker box? What's in? I said, oh, dairy. And they're like, what? Why? And I'll say, because they've got us addicted. They have to keep putting it in there if we're going to keep buying the cracker. And that just doesn't really, it's like, oh, come on. That seems ridiculous. Like, addicted to crackers. It's like, so,
oh no.
But that, like, explain what's going on there.
Well, it's the combinations. So we have research showing the more different addictive substances you're using, the harder it will be to break away. I remember meeting a researcher, I think from Tufts, for lunch. And she was really skeptical. Before we stood, the food came to the table, and she reaches into her bag and she pulls out a box of crackers. And she says, I just love these crackers. I eat them with every meal. I'm like, and you think processed food addiction doesn't exist? Okay. It's like, yeah. So anytime you process a plant, plants have natural endorphins in them. And if you're eating the whole plant, it's okay. You have fiber, you have the natural vitamins and minerals, you have fat in the naturally occurring in the plant. It's going to break down nice and slowly, and you're not going to get high off of that. But that's not what food processors do. They take away the fiber, they grind it into a powder or make it into a liquid so that your body will absorb it very quickly and you will get that glucose high, which is accompanied by a reward center high. So it's the processing. It's like when you look at how do you make opium, nobody's walking around marketing poppies. They're marketing what's been extracted and concentrated
from it. Yeah.
Or fermented from, or even when you're making coffee, when you're making coffee, you're extracting the caffeine from the coffee bean and making it more available so it gets into the system all at once. This is how you create the instability. You want that high because it's going to be followed by a crash. And in the crash, you become absolutely desperate and irrational about getting the substance. The other thing, the most important thing I think that happens when you get that high is you've activated all of those addicted brain cells. What has happened there, it's pulled the blood supply away from the frontal lobe. And now you can't think. The frontal lobe is where you're rational, it's where paying attention, learning, making decisions, remembering, and exercising impulse control. That's where those cells are.
Okay.
You pull the blood supply away from them and you are helpless.
Talk to us about those reward systems and how they work. You mentioned, I think, 4. They work a little differently, don't they?
Well, they're responding to different substances. But the thing that really I think is most important is the evidence for what's called down regulation. Mm-hmm. And it's very clear. So what happens when an addicted reward center cell is activated, like dopamine, it'll just start releasing a flood. One researcher called it a flood of dopamine. Well, that's one thing, but that dopamine has to travel across a synapse and hit the receptor for the next cell before you're going to get the effect. And when you have an addiction, you're getting way too much bombardment on that receptor. And it crumples. It closes down. It looks like the head of a dead iris. And it just closes in on itself. I'm going to give you the good news before I go on, which is it will open up again if you reduce the bombardment. So that is how you get tolerance or increased use over time. So there are a few still left open, and you want that high. And the high comes from the number of times you bombard, the number of times you hit a receptor. So you want that high. How do you get it? Well, you try to hit the remaining receptors more often. And so you're using more and more over time. What those neurotransmitters do is they travel over to behavior centers. And they're controlling behavior centers by bombarding the receptors on those behavior centers. Here's what's so kind of disconcerting about it is you can see on MRI studies that transaction can happen between the addicted brain cells and the behavior brain cells without ever going anywhere near the frontal lobe. This is all in the midbrain, the primitive brain. It's 3 million years old. And then you have the 7 million year old primitive brain that's the food-seeking brain. It's another reason why this is so hard is because dieting and fasting will wake up the food-seeking brain, and that will dominate everything. Mm-hmm. And that's how you know that you've woken up that part of your brain if you're binging. That's the part of the brain that's there to keep us from dying of famine. Mm-hmm. If you're in a famine and you find food, you eat it as fast as you can, and then you run away and hide so that the predators who are realizing that you're there don't get you.
So the initial, from the beginning, how food affects our brain and our body, it wasn't designed to turn off or turn on really anything in our brain. It was to satiate us and to give us energy. So even though some whole plants are fatty or sugary, like an avocado or a strawberry or a potato, we do not have the ability to get addicted to those foods.
Well, here's
from a brain chemistry standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, if you just ate them and you ate them in combination, so you were getting protein and fat and a lot of fiber mm-hmm. in each meal, and of course carbohydrate, no, you wouldn't get addicted. This is why you look at pictures of the American population in the 1940s. There were very few overweight people, and why it happens so fast. So, however, once you've been through this process and your brain cells are permanently sensitized, it's the same kind of information storage that allows you to get on a bicycle after 40 years of not riding a bicycle and ride the bicycle.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to relearn how to ride a bicycle because that information is stored. So the 98% of the brain is in the business of automatically pulling in information and storing it and then acting on it. So once you've had that, like there are plenty of whole foods, unprocessed foods that a recovering processed food addict just wants to stay clear of. The high sugar fruits, the most starchy starches, and we have methods for figuring out what people can safely eat without triggering cravings.
Talk to us about cue management. What are some of the common triggers? Because you've said that they're the most common cause of relapse is not recognizing triggers and being prepared for them.
Yeah. You know, you asked me what it takes to recover, and I got off on a different topic. I recently put together a list of 20 must-haves. This is such a deeply embedded brain alteration. But one of them is training in cue management, because the research on cues as the leading cause of lapse is rock solid. I mean,
Explain what a cue is, though. I think a lot of people might not even know what that is.
Okay, so for the 7 million years of human evolution, if you could find food, you would live. And if you couldn't find food, you would die. So every time somebody found food, the brain has this massive imprinting system. So if I found food, my brain would immediately imprint. Okay, there's that mountain over there, there's this tree right here, there's this stream going over there, and there's this much light, so it's this season, and it's this time of day, and I'm with Fred. Every detail would be imprinted and remembered. So when that time of year came, you would know to get Fred and walk to that place. And you would find that place because you wouldn't remember that tree, this mountain, this stream, right here, dig right here. And you and Fred would start digging. So these are called associative cues. And every bite of processed food that we've ever taken, we've gotten that imprinting. So when it gets to be the holiday time, the winter holiday time, the brain says, oh, you know, sugar, flour, fat, salt, lots of it, parties. You go to a party and the whole messaging is, this is where you binge because there's a lot of food here. So eat as much as you can before. Your Aunt Mabel makes XYZ. So whenever you see Aunt Mabel, you think about XYZ. Your office colleagues bring it in. So the break room is now, you go in there and you can't help but start craving. If you've ever eaten anything in the break room, you get an email at your desk saying, you know, gooey ooey is in the break room. Now your desk is an associative cue. So we've learned over all these years. We've had the Addiction Reset community for 3 years now. A lot of times people can't start changing their food. They have to start somewhere else. They have to start like setting boundaries in their relationships first, or they have to get away from the television first, or they have to, they have to deal with some emotional issues first.
Yeah.
They can't start with the food.
I have Alexandra and I both have histories of eating disorders 20, 25 years ago. And the only time that I ever find myself overeating is because of if I'm in a large group setting and I don't really know anyone, like I've gone to speak somewhere and then there's like a dinner or something afterwards and I'm sitting at a table with strangers and social anxiety and an extreme introvert. And it's just like fill the void. Or maybe people will see I'm eating and they won't talk to me. I think that it never happens in any other setting in my life. But that is one, so of course it hasn't happened in a year because
yeah.
So that's been nice. And I'm as hyper aware that it's happening because I'm, it went through a lot of therapy. So I know what's happening. And I'm like, I am in this right now and this is happening. I know that one of the keys would be to stop, sit, and be with the person next to me, like as an introvert, connect with someone, not everyone, what the steps would be. It's really hard to do, though, to put into practice.
And I'll tell you why. I think why. Once we had that Zoom meeting, the first 2 weeks of January 2018, I said, something happened here. I don't know what happened here. I started looking and I found mirror neurons.
Okay.
Yeah. So for those 7 million years, if you were in a group of 7 to 12 people, you would live if you copied them.
Mm-hmm.
When they were eating, you ate. When they were looking for food, you looked for food. When they were going for the shelter, you went for the shelter. When they were fighting off the predator, you fought off the predator. You would live and your children would live. So people who are able to conform lived and passed on their genes. But the one who had just really felt like wandering off on their own, that person, the giant hyenas were waiting for that person. And we do know that hyenas ate humans. So you would not live. The nonconformers did not pass down their genes. Now, this is what is so crucial. I'm going to start crying again because this is how we save people. Mirror neurons are more powerful than the addicted neurons, and they are more powerful than the food-seeking neurons most of the time. If you were really in a famine, you would wander off and look for food, because if you found food, you would eat it all. You wouldn't share it with your tribe, and you would live. So there is an exception to the mirror neuron rule. But otherwise, mirror neurons will, they will overcome the addiction. And that's what was happening on that first day of January 2018. We all got on Zooms, and we all, that Zoom, you gotta understand also, this is the weirdest thing. Only the frontal lobe understands screens. So for 7 million years, if the rest of the brain saw something, it's because it was there. It was the only way you would see something. It was because it was there. So the other 98% of the brain is still operating, whereas if I see it, it's there. And it must be my tribe. Okay. So, yeah.
Can you connect the mirror neurons to my story?
Yes. Okay. Yes. So you
let's talk about me. No, I want to make sure we make that connection because it's fascinating.
Yeah. So you're just around enough people and they're all eating. So what activates mirror neurons the most? It's 5 or more people. So one other person is not going to activate mirror neurons like 5 or more people will. Eating activates a lot of mirror neurons. So I know they always have meals. A meal is going on. And typically it's people you know well, but there's another factor, which is stress. So the stress pathway in the brain lies very close to the addicted brain cells. If you get enough stress, those addicted brain cells will start pumping out that neurotransmitter that's going to control behavior. So here's what you do about that. What we're doing in the ARC, the Addiction Reset community, is we're creating a food tribe. And we have 12 hours of live programming per day now, so that the amount of time, this is math, this is just math, you got to spend enough hours, because the mirror neurons, if they see somebody once, they don't see them again, they're not going to copy them. But if you see the same people hour after hour after hour, day after day after day, you are activating those mirror neurons. They are more responsive to people whom you know well. We spend a lot of time in these meetings just checking in. It's just so that everybody's mirror neurons will recognize, oh yeah, I know that person. Yeah, their child was sick the other day. I wonder how that child is. The only way a mirror neuron would know that much about somebody is if they knew that person well. And so you get that mirror neuron activation. So when you go to an event like you went to, you would be saying an affirmation like, my tribe doesn't eat that. And your mirror neurons would say, you bet our tribe doesn't eat that. We're not eating that. The other thing you can do is you can use the planning center in the brain. There is a planning center. You can write a play about going to that event. You give your talk, everybody's dressed this way, it's this time of day, this is how I get there. You're setting up all the cueing. And so your brain follows those cues and gets there and says, oh yeah, I know what to do. And then you just write out what you want to do in that situation. I want to go to this table. I've already arranged with the people to put a salad and this on my plate. It's a special order. And, you know, I've already told them that I don't eat XYZ. At these hotels now, they're all set up to accommodate these kinds of situations. And you will be shocked at how easy it is to get through that. By the time you've gotten through all the cueing and your brain is flooded with these craving neurotransmitters, I don't think it's unrealistic. I don't think it's realistic to think that with a brain that's flooded with craving neurotransmitters that you're going to be able to remember to be mindful, focus on the person next to you. I just don't think that's fair. That is not a fair fight.
So planning ahead and engaging your frontal lobe. And if I just could sum up what you said in terms of DOTSI, is that the conformance drive, the drive for us to be like people around us, because that's a survival mechanism, is a thing that makes us often eat when other people are eating. If DOTSI was in a large conference room where nobody was eating, but there was a little tray of you know, something in the corner and no one was eating, she probably wouldn't stand there and overeat those things because no one else was eating. So it's really important to understand that we mimic when we're stressed, what other people, so that we can feel safe. And that's a big cue for us when we're at parties. And when DOTSI's at a conference, is that? Did I get that?
Yeah, you don't have to be stressed. You can stress will make it worse. Stress will make the cravings worse. It'll make the loss of control more likely. But the key to everything is that mirror neuron activation. So we just, you know, we do weekend workshops in the ARC, and we just did a weekend workshop on social circles. What's the evidence? What's the evidence? So I picked out 10 studies and presented them to ARC members. And this guy did this amazing study of social circles. And his conclusion was, if your social circle is gaining weight, you will gain weight. And if your social circle is not losing weight, you cannot lose weight. Mirror neurons will not let you do it. Mirror neurons will just be busily, oh, nobody's losing weight. Okay, make sure that fat doesn't get converted. Nope, got to hold on to that fat. Nobody's losing weight, so we're not going to, no, we're not losing weight. No way. And there are lots of mechanisms in the body that will prevent you from losing weight.
So it sounds to me like some of the strategies we can do is be aware of the cues, and especially the mirror neurons that will encourage us to follow people, and also to plan ahead so that we are being mindful and we're using the front lobe. Can you talk a little bit about maybe three steps, first steps for someone who's struggling with binging, how to get out of that cycle? The first three things that they can do themselves in their homes, strategies to employ.
First of all, find out if you've got a severe addiction. So this is not a diagnosis, but on our website, we do have a self-quiz with those 11 criteria. Secondly, just start to really look at the people around you and what they're eating. And on that basis, forgive yourself, stop blaming yourself. I think stop blaming yourself is right at the top of the list. You didn't ask the tobacco companies to addict you, and you didn't ask all those sorry, I'm going to say this word, bogus diet companies to make it worse. What did those bogus diet companies do? They activated the food seeking mechanism. So now you've got addicted brain cells and hyperactive food seeking. It's so hard and it's so awful. So stop blaming yourself. Get educated about what the tobacco industry did, and get educated about what it means to have a severe addiction. And then the third thing is get the queuing under control in your house. Get the processed foods out of the house. And, household members are not allowed to bring them in the house. If they insist on having them, they've got to be locked in the trunk of their car. Get the television turned off. Television is just a massive relapse queue.
Is that because of the ads, or because people tend to eat in front of the television because that's what they've been doing, so they repeat that habit?
It's stressful. All television programming is either stressful, or if it's just pure entertainment like singing, the actors, the singers are underweight. And if you're looking around with your 7 million-year-old brain, you're saying, wow, everybody's so thin. There must be a famine. I better go eat something.
You help, as we're speaking about, help people recover from diet-related diseases by focusing on their food addiction. Most doctors and dietitians, at least all the ones that I've ever spoken to, they just really work on changing food choices without even really acknowledging there could be a severe addiction. Yeah, because people are just stuck, right? And then they start self-loathing, feeling terrible about themselves. They can't just do this thing that they paid good money to go to this dietitian. Is that why we are a sick nation, because of food addiction first?
Totally.
And then, okay.
Yeah.
What advice do you have to these dietitians and doctors, kind of like Alexandra just did, like the 3 steps or the 3 things or the 2 things that you might say to them to help them to help their patients by acknowledging or even being able to assess if there's an underlying addiction there first before it's like change your food.
The health professionals are just as traumatized as the patients.
Yeah.
They've spent, like my daughter's an MD. I calculated once it took 10 years out of her life, and including foregone income for those 10 years, it would cost probably $750,000. And I know what she thought. She grew up in this house. She thought she was just going to advise people on processed foods and they would get better. Well, she came smack up against the addiction. And now she's frustrated. So you see doctors retiring early, frustrated, depressed. They have the addiction themselves. So we're offering training. I'm sorry. I mean, I'd like to say there's some quick fix. Deep addictions don't respond to quick fixes. So,
no quick fix, but what would they ask their patients to figure out if it's an addiction versus maybe they could just change their food choices?
Go to foodaddictionreset.com and have them take the quiz, the self-quiz. This is very easy to diagnose. I mean, you can even take just those 6 questions, the most common. And I know you need these very, very short questionnaires in health professionals' offices. You've got these 8-minute or 6-minute appointments. And it is, I think, the kindest thing that you can do for a patient, which is to open the door, that they've been given a very severe addiction by the tobacco industry was able to get 2/3 of American adults to smoke. These are powerful advertisers. They were able to persuade 2/3 of Americans that cigarettes were relaxing and enjoyable and sexy. I mean, they are repulsive. They're like the opposite of sexy. Yeah. But those manufacturers, those advertisers, just think of Lauren Bacall and Humphrey Bogart flirting and smoking. Oh, isn't that sexy? By association, right? The flirting
has with Coke now. Coke, it's, you have a great life if you drink Coke. Coca-Cola, I'm talking about. Coca-Cola or Pepsi, you're happier and more alive.
When you get the idea about associated queuing and you watch those ads, it just makes you sick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to be clear on one thing, because I struggle with sugar addiction. Dotsie doesn't really like sugar. Is that, it makes it, and she actually is fully recovered from her eating disorder, although
Yay.
yay. And
I like it. I'm not drawn to it. And I won't overeat it. Like I'll eat a square of dark chocolate and the candy bar will last for 8 days if I have it. So I mean, it just doesn't, I don't have that anymore where I'm like, I need to eat the whole thing. But I mean, it's nice, but yeah.
So my question is, and I don't drink at all alcohol. I've never developed a taste for it or anything, but some people, they're alcoholics, and not Dotsie, but
I have a taste for it for sure.
You have a taste for it.
Yeah.
So these strong foods with salt, sugar, and fat, some people are able to resist them, right? They either don't like I don't like salt at all.
Yeah.
And have never ever added salt to my dish ever. But sugar I do, and there must be some people who don't really have a thing about either of those things and aren't addicts. Are they few and far between? Tell us.
I mean, when you think about, so when we actually published the first description of, we called it refined food addiction in the academic press, got the name of the disease. For that, I went into the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, consumption statistics. And I came up with Americans, I looked before the obesity epidemic and after, so like 1970 and 1997. And because I wanted to show what foods had been increased in use during those years. So what was the basis for the obesity epidemic? It was sugar and high fructose corn syrup, flour, mostly gluten-containing flour, high-fat dairy, and French fries. And the consumption of those, now remember, even in 1970, over 40% of Americans were overweight or obese. So it went from 3/4 of a pound per person per day, 3/4 of a pound per person per day, up to 1.2 pounds per person per day
Of
sugars, flours containing gluten, high-fat dairy, and French fries. Like there was not an increase in beans, there wasn't an increase in meat, there wasn't an increase in, I forget what else I looked at. It was those very specific drug-like processed foods. So you have 30 years of this and eating a pound per person per day on average, which means half the country, men, women, and children, are eating more. Children are not eating that much, so there's even more. And when you have that much exposure to a substance, a trio, 3 substances that impact the brain within half a second of hitting the mouth, there are very few people who are not addicted. So I'll give you a good example. When I had that prepared meal company, we were serving a high-end law firm in downtown Houston, and I'd call up those high functioning. I mean, this is a high-end law firm. So they're getting the cream of the crop of the law students. I call them up at the end of the week, and how did it go? Well, I had some strange things. I seem to be thinking more clearly. I'm not having cravings. And my mid-afternoon slump is gone. So do you think that's related to the food? It's like, oh my God. At that level, processed foods are affecting these people. So at that point, I just threw up my hands. I said, I've got some good evidence that this impacts everybody. It's like cigarettes. So there are over 100 diseases associated with processed foods. The World Health Organization is now saying that diet-related diseases have surpassed smoking-related diseases as the leading cause of preventable death. So I think of them like cigarettes. Like, yeah, sure, you could smoke 1 cigarette a day. Should you? No. Is it hurting you? Yes. These are very destructive substances. Should you be using them at all? No. Would you be happier if you weren't? Yeah. Are they hard to get off? You bet.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's it. I mean, that's just the truth.
I have a question, and it's mostly because it was something I experienced in my athletic career. So I understand for, let's say, we say sugar, salt, and fat. Fat, you would eat, obviously, an avocado instead of, chocolate pudding or a candy bar, and, a potato instead of a donut. But salt, is sodium, and, electrolytes are essential minerals in the body: sodium, calcium, potassium, magnesium, to name a few. And they literally have an electrical charge, right? And they're very important to help your body balance its water, its hydration.
Yeah.
So what is one to do there? Because is there certain types of salts that you recommend and not? But I have always as an athlete, I was always salting my food. I do like salt. Like Alexandra knows, I'd rather have a salted anything than a sweet anything. My blood pressure is extremely low. I still work out and sweat quite a bit, so I haven't really curbed my salt intake. I don't eat a ton of it, but so, and I don't feel like I have an addiction to it. But what is someone to do if they have a salt addiction, but you can't have zero salt?
Yeah, so this is a super excellent question. We have a study showing that no salt is just as harmful as excessive salt. And it's a U-shaped curve. And so moderate salt is essential. And it's for exactly what you're saying. It's the electrolyte balance. So you just have to, you have to be conscious of it. Like, yes, you want to get a mineral, not a stripped down sodium. And like I have a salt grinder. It's 3 grinds over my food. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah, and if I'm like, okay, now I'm up to 4, now I'm up to 5, I gotta stop, figure out what I'm stressing about. Why am I looking for this high? This is a really interesting study. It was done by Mark Gold at University of Florida, who was running a morphine recovery clinic. And he just noted these poor morphine addicts were coming in, like taking the top off the salt shaker and pouring it on their food. And that's how he got the idea that salt activates the opiate pathways. Excessive salt. Moderate salt doesn't do it. And it just train your brain. Nope, that's all we're getting. So don't even bother to try to, trigger the addiction. I'm not falling for it. It's creating a craving is not going to work.
And then the dopamine receptors that have been
downregulated,
heal.
They'll open up again. Yeah. And this is crucial because those pathways were designed for pleasure and satisfaction and feeling good. So this is why we have an epidemic of mood disorders. It's because those pathways are not working. It's kind of shocking to see the pictures of it, the brain scans. But at our website, at our Facebook group, Food Addiction Education, that is the profile picture for that group. And anybody says, I don't think this exists. Look, look. Yeah, and it's worse. The alterations to the obese population were more severe than the alterations for the cocaine addicted population. We have some really good research showing that particularly sugar is more addictive and more destructive than cocaine.
Well, thank you so much for all this amazing information. I know that our audience is going to be really interested. So foodaddictionreset.com is the website where they can take the test to see how addicted they are to processed food. Yeah.
I also recommend our main website is processedfoodaddiction.com. We've got a lot of free stuff there. So, I just think this was grace that I got to write the 6th book. It took me 3 years. My dad had just died and left me enough money that I could sit there for 3 years and write it. So my way of giving back from that is we have a lot of free stuff. So start out with processfoodaddiction.com. And the very first thing is free stuff. We're going to ask you for your email address because we want to keep in touch with you. But yeah, go to processfoodaddiction.com and then you'll find the link to take the quiz and all that other stuff.
Okay,
Well,
that's the main. Is there any social media for those out there that like that to be able to follow you guys?
You know, we've got a Facebook group now of over 19,000. It's called Food Addiction Education. It's a great place to go. I post there. I'm out there. I call it ministering to. It's kind of like a field hospital. Somebody said it's like a field hospital. You know, people just come in and they're dying and literally dying, and we pick them up. We are on Instagram and Twitter, and then I have a speaker website. Let me just say, I have a speaker website. It's Dr. Joan Ifland, JoanIfland.com, and that's where our podcasts are.
And congratulations on your book. Anybody who writes a book, that's a huge, huge accomplishment.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you guys so much. You're literally out there opening doors for people to walk out of a very, very dark place.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Joan. Hey, folks. Okay. Back by very popular demand is our plant-powered plate fridge magnet, which you are going to receive for free if you leave us a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on. So here are the details. Just write your quick review. Does not need to be long. Does not need to be a whole story. Just be honest and speak from the heart. Then take a quick screenshot of the review you wrote and email it to us at podcast@switchforgood.org. That's podcast@switchforgood.org. And include your mailing address so we can send you a power plate. We are doing this because the more reviews we garner, the higher we go in search results, which means more folks will learn about our podcast. So the power is in your hands. Leave us a review and zoom, your power plate arrives at your doorstep.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the switch for good, please visit us at switchforgood.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to switch for good. This is the future.